Hello, and welcome to the Conservative Christian Commentator. I'm your host, Mycroft, and I hope you're having a great day. I wanted to talk about something that's been on my mind for the past day or so. I was browsing, I believe, a Reddit thread, and I came across a woman who was complaining about how her partner wanted more communication from her. And as someone who has a lot of experience communicating myself, I was a high school debater for many, many years, and that forced me to learn a lot about communication. And as a child, I was studying a ton about communication because we as a family decided that we wanted to learn more about something specifically called nonviolent communication. And I have found that I ended up knowing a lot more about that than apparently people do. I just thought that I knew the average amount, but I wanted to maybe share some of those principles that I have learned and found to work in life, using this Reddit user as an example. I'm not going to talk about specific usernames. I'm going to be speaking in generalities. If this doesn't apply to you, don't sweat about it. It's not going to apply to everyone. Generalities, as a matter of their nature, do not apply to everyone. They just apply to a lot of people. So if you believe that this does not apply to you, then feel free to just disregard anything that this video says. Can't make anybody listen to anything I say, and I wouldn't want to force anyone to listen to what I have to say because I'm not perfect. But I wanted to share my perspective on this because I think that I could bring something to the discussion. So, in the post in question, the woman was complaining that her man wanted her to communicate more and to talk to him more. And then she proceeded to complain that when she communicated more, he didn't like it. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a contradiction in terms. Well, you said you wanted me to communicate more, but when I communicate more, you don't like it. And that's what a lot of women apparently seem to think. I have run across this. I can't even count the number of times I've run across this on the internet, in real life. A lot of women seem to hold the belief that men want them to communicate more until they communicate more. And that led me to think and wonder what exactly she was communicating. Well, it turns out the thing that she specifically said that she communicated to her partner was twofold. One, I want more intimacy, and two, you need to try harder with my parents. And she said that she told him that in as many words. And then she was really quite surprised and really quite baffled when he responded negatively to that. And I was confused as to why she was surprised that he would respond negatively to that, because that's an incredibly negative way to communicate something like that. But she didn't seem to get it, and none of the other people in the thread seemed to get it. At least none of the other women who were complaining about, men not wanting to receive the communication that they wanted. So it had me thinking, and I realized, I believe studies show, and I could be wrong on this, but I believe studies show that about 75 to 80% of people are bad communicators, and that's something I can definitely believe. I'm no pro at communicating myself, but I have done a lot of work to learn and improve my communication style. But 75 to 80% of people are terrible communicators. So, what I believe that a lot of the men who are saying they want more communication, they're not saying they want more terrible communication. They're saying they want more good communication. And in this particular woman's case, and I have found in a lot of women's cases, when they communicate more, that more is just more of the terrible communication. It's not more of the good communication. Let me explain what I mean by that. let's break down what that woman said that she wanted. She wanted from her man more intimacy, and she wanted him to try harder with her family. And he didn't like that she said that. Well, why didn't he like that? Think about what she said communicated to him. What is the message that sends? The message that statement sends is, 1, you're not intimate with me. 2, you don't try hard with my family. And of course, from the man's perspective, he's always going to see the effort that he puts in, so he's going to believe that he tried hard. Whether or not he actually did try hard is, funnily, quite irrelevant. It's kind of hilarious how irrelevant it is. But whether or not he actually did try hard, from his perspective, he's going to believe that he tried hard. And from her perspective, she doesn't believe that he tried at all. And those two contradicting perspectives are where the miscommunication comes from. Secondly, it's very vague. I want more intimacy. What does more intimacy mean? I want you to hug me twice a day? I want you to hug me 3 times a day but you're only doing it twice a day now. It sounds ridiculous to break it down, but there's nothing actionable in that first phrase. I want you to try harder with my family. There's also nothing actionable in that phrase. He needs to know what she means by try harder. Does she mean, I want you to treat my mom better? And even then, that's still really that's not actionable really either, but it's a start that's better than I want you to try harder. Try harder to do what? So, I think that if I was in her position, the way to communicate that message would not be, I want you to X, because I want you to X is a fundamentally attacking method of communication. Number 1, it's vague, and number 2, it's attacking. So because it is both vague and attacking, it makes him feel bad when she communicates in this way, because it's a bad way of communicating. So if I was in her position and I wanted more intimacy, what I would say that would communicate better is nothing to do with what I want you to do. What I would say is, I feel neglected. I know that you aren't trying to make me feel neglected, and I know that you're trying to do X, Y, and Z, recognize positive behaviors that he's done, but I still feel neglected. Can you help me with this? And it's a much more team perspective than I want you. It's more of a, I feel this, and I know it doesn't always, I know that it doesn't always reflect in the entirety of reality, but I still feel this. And then from there, you can go and explore why she feels the way that she feels. So I think that it was... Now, obviously, before I go on, I want to address the exception that people are inevitably going to mention. The exception is that there are some people out there who are straight up psychopaths, and no matter how good of a communicator you are, they're just not going to get it. Psychopaths make up 5% to the maximum 10% of the population. It waffles between 5 and 10%. It goes down to about 5%. People generally forget about psychopaths. They stop talking about psychopaths, and that allows them to gain more until they get up to about 10%. Then horror stories start to get out, and then their chances of reproduction go down. So it waffles between 5 and 10% statistically if you follow the numbers. So between 5 and 10% of chance that the guy you are dating or the woman you are dating is a psychopath. There's a 70 to 80% chance that both of you are bad communicators. Well, actually, no. There's a 70 to 80% chance that each of you individually is a bad communicator. The chance that both of you are bad communicators is statistically naturally lower, but each of you has an individual 70 to 80% chance that you're a bad communicator. But the concepts of nonviolent communication are that you need to separate your feelings from the facts, something that I have found to be very vital in conflict, not just in romantic relationships, but in just friendships, business relationships, everything in general, is to say, I feel X, and it has to be a feeling. You can't use I feel like you don't try. That's just a disguised accusation of you don't try, and I feel like is really more of a I think. We tend to use I feel and substitute of I think a lot, and that's a whole other problem. But, and I'm guilty of it too. But I feel X emotion, and then follow that up instantly and immediately before the person says anything with, I recognize this feeling is not objective reality. This feeling is just how I see the world. This is just my perspective. It doesn't mean this is objective reality. I'm not trying to say it means objective reality. My feelings are not objective. My feelings are subjective. This is my experience. This is my feeling. Can we work with this? And this is in conflict specifically, because conflict has to be handled delicately. Conflict is vital, but conflict done wrong is where relationships fall apart. But conflict done right is where relationships are forged. And this applies to romance, friendship, business, everything. So if you're feeling something, then you need to communicate that you're feeling something, but you need to separate those feelings from reality. And then you can point to the behaviors in reality that, in your opinion, contribute to how you feel, but don't say that the behaviors in the reality are the ones that have to change. Mention that the behaviors in reality are things that you would like to change. So you mention how you're feeling, and then you mention what the other person might be able to do about it, but you give them the option to say no or push back, because there is a very, very real chance, and often it's usually the case more than it is not the case, that your feelings about the specific action are a complete different interpretation to how they interpreted or meant the action. Because the message that you intend to send with, say, I don't know, let's say I give a young woman flowers. I give her a flower with the intention of communicating interest and appreciation and could say love, but I'm not going to put this in a romantic context at the moment. Let's just say flowers as a nice gift of appreciation. I intend to give you this flower as a nice gift of appreciation. But I don't really say any of that, I just give her the flower. The message that she's going to receive is almost certainly romantic, because flowers are hardly ever given out of the context of romance, and she's almost certainly going to interpret that as definite interest, and she's probably going to interpret it negatively because there probably hasn't been a whole lot of communication around that otherwise, and if you just spring romantic feelings on somebody, they're not going to like it. So the fact of the matter is that I meant one thing with the flower, but she felt a different thing and received a different message with the same exact flower. Flower didn't change. It's just a fact that because I meant one thing, that does not mean that she received that thing. So it's you have to be very clear. And so as an example, that the flower can be whatever you want it to be. It's just an illustration. But what you intend to communicate is very frequently not what they receive. And it's honestly shocking how frequent that is. I have found that people almost never receive exactly what you intend them to receive. Almost never. And that's like 99% of the time they don't receive what I intend them to receive. So if you want to communicate that, it needs to be longer, and it needs to be it needs to come with a statement of intention so that they can understand what your thoughts behind it are. it would be wildly different if I gave the flower to this young lady with the note saying, I want you to have this as a token of my appreciation of X. Like, say, my appreciation of your volunteer work at the church or something like that. I'm just spitballing examples. I know it's a terrible example, but it's just work with me for a second. If I were to include a note with that flower saying, this flower is a token of my appreciation for your selfless work at the church, then she would be much more likely to receive it with that intention in mind and think of it as a nice gesture, albeit a little weird one because you don't really use flowers for that. But again, just bear with me for the sake of the example. The flower itself is immaterial to what I'm trying to communicate, because it doesn't matter. I could be giving her anything, and if I didn't communicate along with that what the intention was, then she would have just been free to interpret it herself, and she would have almost certainly interpreted a completely different intention than I had, originally intended. So, when you communicate something, anything, you usually have to communicate your intentions behind it as well. So if your intentions are to attack someone and you really need to pray and ask God what your intentions are, and if you're not Christian, you really need to have a hard sit down and a hard think about what your intentions are, and ask yourself, are my intentions really to make the relationship better, or are my intentions just to attack this person and make them pay for the negative feelings that they've made me experience? So that needs to happen before you communicate anything. So first, you need to be clear on what your intentions are before you communicate that to anyone else. Then, when you make that communication, you need to communicate what your intentions are that you're now clear on, and then you need to be sure that they understand it. But the only way to be sure is to first reach out and communicate. So when men in general tend to say, I want more communication from my wife, they don't mean I want more terrible communication like you need to try harder with my family. They tend to mean I want more good communication. And a lot of men tend to be terrible at communication as well, because men and women in general are just terrible communicators, because we don't really seem to put a massive emphasis on good communication in our society. So what we need to do is assume that the most likely scenario is just that you both are simply terrible communicators, both parties to whatever disagreement. And that's the first thing that I have found to assume, and that has led to the resolution of many, many disagreements in my life, is just assuming that we would probably be in agreement if we were communicating clearly. But the fact that we're in a disagreement shows that there is a miscommunication, because a lot of the disagreements I have found stem from a miscommunication. So if you can solve that miscommunication, you solve the disagreement. So if you come at it from a stance of, I am fighting for the friendship, for the relationship, then it comes at it from a very, very different stance of, I'm fighting for me. Because in a friendship and in a relationship, it needs to be the both of you against the problem, not the both of you against each other. There are obviously still cases where one party is acting maliciously, and actually coming at it from a stance of both of us against the problem is a great way to filter that out. But be really careful before you judge that, because it's really, really easy for us as humans to see a miscommunication as a declaration of opposition. And that's why we tend to receive communication badly, because we tend to see it as a declaration of opposite intent, or a declaration of opposite, I guess you could say, opposite, not enjoyment, but to say that I'm not getting the same joy out of this that you are. I don't enjoy this, and you maybe do. So we kind of see miscommunications as a declaration of hostilities, almost. So it's very easy for you to assume that I am doing this from a stance of we need to work together against the problem, instead of and he's just or she's just being hostile, when the reality is that you're probably just not communicating very well with him or her. I do find it highly ironic that for all their talk of how they want men to be better communicators and how men need to be better communicators that I see online and in real life, I see it so much in real life. It's kind of insane how women in general tend to talk about how men need to be better communicators, when frequently they really suck at communicating just the same as men do. They just talk more about it. Women tend to talk more, men tend to talk less, but both genders tend to be terrible communicators on the whole. The reality is that you are almost certainly a bad communicator. I'm a bad communicator on a lot of levels. I have done a lot of work to make sure that I can be a better communicator on a lot of levels, but I'm still nowhere near perfect. There are still a lot of ways in which I can be interpreted as rude or mean-spirited, but that's just the fact of the reality, is that I'm not going to ever be perfect at communicating, and I accept that, but I'm doing the best I can to work on my communication style and separate the facts from my feelings and separate my feelings from the reality of the situation and recognize that those are not the same, they will never be the same, but let's work to bring them as close as possible. So, it's really ironic, I find, when people complain about how insert gender here doesn't communicate well, when frequently the problem is just that neither of them are good communicators and neither of them are communicating in healthy manners and in healthy, non-violent manners. Because when you communicate violently, what you're going to get back is violence. Because humans reciprocate what they believe they're receiving. And if they believe they're receiving something that's an attack, they're going to attack back. And it's usually out of pain, and it doesn't help anyone, but that's just how humans tend to be. So, it's the biblical principle of take the plank out of your eye before you handle the splinter in someone else's. Because usually the problem starts with you, and usually it's a lot bigger than the problem that the other person is having. And it's really inconvenient because we don't like to admit that we have problems. I mean, obviously, it's very easy for us to admit that we have problems in general, but it's not easy for us to admit that we have a specific problem that is contributing to this specific situation, because it's very hard to admit that. It's very hard to admit that the conflict could be our fault. We really like to come from the side of, well, I'm just doing the right thing. I'm just doing the best I can, and he's just, or she's just, or they're just. And anything following they're just is usually just going to be, anything following they're just is going to be some form of excuse. They're just attacking me. They're just, you know the type of statement that I'm talking about, because we've all made it, we've all seen it, and none of us accept it when we see it in other people, but every one of us accept it when we do it ourselves, including me. I'm not excluding me from this. I do this all the time, and I'm doing my absolute best to not do it anymore. But there's frequently times where I would think that, well, this person is just attacking me because they're mean. Well, no, probably they're not. They're probably just busy, and they probably just don't have time to be as considerate for my feelings as they might think they were, they might think they're being. They're probably just rushed. They might be in a hurry. That's very frequently what happens. So, they're just statements don't help. He's just trying to attack me. He's just making sure that I'm not getting out of line in his mind. No, that's not how that works. He doesn't have the patience to be trying to keep you in line. He's not your father. Or if he is your father, he probably should have done a better job when you were a kid. I'm talking to adults here, I'm not talking to kids. So, he's probably just trying his best to communicate, and he's probably doing just as terrible a job as you are. Well, she's just trying to control me. Well, she's just trying to rule every single little detail of my life. Well, she probably actually doesn't have the patience to rule every single detail of your life. She's probably just feeling insecure about something that you're doing, and as a result, she's lashing out because she feels insecure. And the two of you need to work out what exactly she's feeling insecure about so that you can help her deal with the feeling, which will help the actions follow along, because actions follow feelings. Feelings do not follow actions, actions follow feelings. When someone acts a certain way, it is because they feel a certain way. It is not, they do not act a certain way and that causes them to feel a certain way. They act because they feel, they do not feel because they act. Humans will feel because others act, but humans will not feel because they act. Humans act because they feel. So when you see an action that you don't like, understand that there's most likely a sympathetic feeling behind it, and this is very hard to do in the midst of a conflict, because in the midst of a conflict, when emotions are high and tempers are high, you really want to make sure that you really just want to make sure that you're right and that they're wrong and that you win this conflict. And that's not going to help anybody, because if you win a fight in your relationship, then your relationship lost the fight. Because there are three parties to every fight. There's you, there's them, and then there's the relationship that the two of you have. And that relationship is the thing that needs to win that fight every time. You don't need to win that fight. They don't need to win that fight. The relationship must win the fight every single time. People don't realize that the relationship is, in a sense, its own party in the fight. So, if you win, the relationship loses. There can only be one winner in any fight. And the winner has to be the relationship, or the relationship loses and the relationship suffers. Too many losses, too many losses on the side of the relationship, and the relationship will disappear. So make sure that when you fight and when she fights, that the relationship wins. Make sure that when you fight and when he fights, that the relationship is the thing that wins. And how do you do that? By separating your feelings from the objective reality that you know is probably separate from your feelings, and mention to them that this is not what is actually happening. This is just how I feel. I need help with this feeling because it's negative and I don't like feeling this way, and I want to feel something differently, and I know you want me to feel something differently, but I don't know how to start feeling something differently. And so I need your help. When you come at it from that way, let's say you're the woman in the Reddit post who her man wants more communication from her, but she's feeling neglected. If you come at it from that way of saying, I'm feeling neglected, I know that's not probably what you're trying to do, and I know you're not intending to make me feel neglected, and I know that this feeling is probably just coming from me misinterpreting something, but I'm still feeling neglected, and I still need help dealing with these negative feelings because they're negative, and I don't want to be constantly feeling neglected. Nobody should want to be constantly feeling neglected. That very frequently disarms the other person and helps them to come at it from a very sympathetic stance. Because nobody wants to feel neglected. Nobody wants others to feel neglected. Well, unless you're a psychopath. But again, 5 to 10% chance. 5% minimum, 10% maximum. So nobody wants other people to feel neglected because they know how they felt when they felt neglected, and they know that it feels terrible. So if you come at it from the point of, I feel this way, you're going to get sympathy from the other person, most likely. If you don't get sympathy, there's two possibilities. Possibility is always the case that they could be a psychopath, but just don't assume that, because people assume that way too much. We way overdiagnose psychopaths, narcissists, sociopaths. People just call each other psychopaths, narcissists, sociopaths. It's essentially people just calling each other crazy. Completely crazy. So stop assuming that they're insane first. Like, it's really easy to do. Maybe they're just really bitter because they believe that you don't care about their feelings at all. And so how they see it is, well, she wants me to care about her feelings, but she's not willing to care about my feelings. And so, well, why should I care about her feelings if she's not willing to care about mine? And that's actually a pretty valid question. Why should they care about your feelings if you have demonstrated that you don't care about theirs? Notice I said that if you have demonstrated, because that's a receive. That's not you probably didn't intend to send that message, because generally romantic partners don't intend to communicate that they don't care about their opponents. Partners, I'm sorry, words is hard. Um, and that's a joke I heard from somebody, and it stuck with me. But they did not intend to communicate that their partner's feelings are not important to them. You probably intended to communicate something completely differently, but that's the message they got. If you didn't have time to help them deal with their emotions, or didn't have time to help them deal with whatever they were feeling at the moment, they probably got the message that you didn't care about their feelings. And if you didn't communicate expressly that it's not that I don't care about your feelings, it's that I really don't have time for that. And even if you did, they probably still got a little bit of that. So it's important to reinforce that afterwards, to go back and address those feelings afterwards when you do have time, because you will always eventually have time. So just make time and go back to it and say, hey, I know you were feeling this way earlier. Are you still feeling that way? Can I help you not feel that way now that we have a little bit of time? But if they got the message consistently that you don't care about your feelings, if that's the message they receive, then they're much less likely to be sympathetic when you approach that. So often, if there's a lot of hurt that's built up in the relationship from the mutual message going back and forth of, I don't care about your feelings, I don't care about your feelings, I don't care about your feelings, I don't care about your feelings. If that's going back and forth constantly in the relationship, then sympathy is a lot harder, because sympathy is building a bridge across the gap that the I don't care about your feelings message is chopping in the middle of the relationship every single time. It's like an axe chopping into a tree. It's harder to build a bridge across a larger gap, but it's still possible usually. If the relationship is still functional, which most relationships still are, even though people like to talk about how dysfunctional their relationship is, most relationships can still function. It's important to realize that that the I don't care about your feelings message can be undone, but it has to be done intentionally. You have to be sure to demonstrate that you care about their feelings. And sometimes, if your partner is if your partner is acting unsympathetically towards you, and it's probably because of that message that's been going back and forth in your relationship subconsciously without you knowing, well, the reason probably is that's probably what the reason is. But in the moment when you're asking for sympathy from them and they're not willing to give it, don't really hold that against them, because that's almost certainly a symptom of the problem that you've been causing and the problem that they've been causing in the relationship, because it takes two to tango. There are obviously relationships where one person is terrible, where the guy is terrible or the woman is terrible, but that's not the usual. The usual is that both people are just kind of sucky communicators. And if you really are terrible at communicating, like both of you almost certainly are, then it's most likely that the communication isn't healthy. And if it's not healthy, the relationship is going to be bad. So make sure that your communication is healthy. So the point that I'm trying to bring across here is that we should stop asking for more communication and should start asking for better communication. And if somebody asks for more communication, don't take that as just a more in general. Take that as more careful about your communication, because your communication is the most important thing. Your communication is what will make or break your relationship. If you do communication wrong, you will break your relationship. And the sun's coming out from behind the clouds. So, that sun coming out from behind the clouds is what you will feel when your communication becomes healthy. So if you have relationship issues, and this won't solve all relationship issues, but it will solve a lot of them. If you have relationship issues, it's almost certainly down to communication, because everything always comes down to some form or fashion of communication, subconscious or conscious. Usually it's the subconscious communication that really trips us up. So if you're in the position of some of the women in the comment section that I was reading prior to this, or if you're in the position of some of the men, realize that they're probably just trying their best with the communication, and from their perspective, you look terrible, just as from your perspective, they look terrible. So maybe it's time, because it's really helpful, maybe it's time for you, because it takes one person, it doesn't take two, it takes one person to put aside both perspectives and just be real about the relationship and talk to the other person. Make sure that, number one, they're feeling good. So like do it in a positive manner. Make sure that they're feeling good. Make sure that they do not. The number one thing you do not want them to feel is you do not want them to feel attacked. So you need to be very clear that you're not attacking them. But be careful about saying, I'm not going to attack you, too much, because the more you say, I'm not going to attack you, the more they're going to start to feel like, well, you say that, but should I be watching out for an attack? No, you need to make sure that because your communication is clear, they're not going to feel attacked. And how they're not going to feel attacked is you separate your facts from your feelings. You separate your feelings from the objective reality, and you use that communication method of, this is how I'm feeling. I know it's not reality, but it's just how I'm feeling. And I know that there are many things that I do to make you feel the same way. And I want to solve that. Because it takes one person to put down their sword to end the conflict. Just one person. Again, disclaimer, that your partner could be a psychopath. They could be way too bitter to handle this. That may be something that they need to work on. But you can't fix that. You can only fix you. And so all you can do is try. And if you don't try, then why are you here? If you don't try, if you're not willing to put an effort to save your relationship, if you're not willing to put an effort to save your communication style, then why are you here? Why are you in a relationship at all? Friendship, business relationship. If you're not willing to put an effort to salvage the relationship, then you shouldn't be in it at all. You need to be willing to put an effort to salvage the relationship, even if the other person completely spits in your face. If they spit in your face, then that's fine. That shows you where you stand. But give it a rule of 3. Try 3 times, and try 3 times, give it a really, really good try 3 times. Not 3 times in a row, because it's just going to make them feel like you're trying to butter them up for something. Try 3 times separately, and if they're still not willing to talk, if they're still not willing to extend even a little bit of an olive branch, even a sprig of olive, then you can just dump the relationship. But if you're not willing to try, you shouldn't be in the relationship in the first place. So make a good effort. That even if they're terrible, even if they're completely not going to respond to anything in the relationship, if you make the best effort you can, then you can leave the relationship knowing that you tried your absolute best. And then you can go into the next relationship that you build, the next friendship. I'm speaking relationship general. I'm not just speaking romantic relationships, although that's very much a good application of this. You can go into the next relationship that you have knowing that you tried your best. And you can go into it trying your best from the get-go. And it's probably going to go way better if you try your best from the get-go. And if you think that this isn't for me, my relationship is completely healthy, it's probably not in some ways. Because there's always ways that we can improve our communication. So maybe your partner doesn't feel the same way. Maybe your friend doesn't feel the same way. Sometimes you kind of have to ask them the hard questions of, how have I been communicating, and how have I been communicating so that you feel negatively? And it starts to sound a little clinical when you do something like that. But sometimes you need to ask the questions that sound boring and clinical, because maintaining a relationship is not fun. Maintaining a relationship is not glamorous. It's simply the work that you must do every day to make sure that both of you are healthy. And the only way that you can do that, it's like brushing your teeth. You don't enjoy brushing your teeth, but you do it to make sure that your teeth are healthy. Well, you should. And I didn't for a while, and I started to pay the price. And it's like taking a shower. It's not fun or glamorous. It isn't saving the world, but it's saving your relationships one little bit at a time. The work is hard, the work is tedious, but the work is also very rewarding. Reward isn't immediate, but the reward over the long term is very, very good. So I guess my plea is that if you feel that the other person isn't trying, then maybe just try yourself. Give it a good college try 3 times, and then if they don't reciprocate, then you can just end the relationship knowing that you tried your best. But try your best to save whatever relationship that you're in that's struggling. And if your relationship isn't struggling, great, but there are still probably ways that you can maintain it better. When you're always seeking to maintain a relationship better, you're going to end up with a happier relationship. So do your best with communication, because everyone sucks at it, and don't assume that your partner is the one who is more terrible at it than you are. Assume that you're the problem because you can fix you. You can't fix them. You can only ever fix you. So do your part to fix the problems that you have. And if you extend the olive branch to them, you'll find more than often that they're willing to extend the olive branch to you. So be well, and thank you for watching.